what about the rest of you? Hi.
Hi.
Man, oh man. Okay. So, I'm going to focus I'm going to try to get a bunch of stuff done today. I would like to have a law exercise, a reading comp exercise, and a analytical reasoning exercise. So that's the goal. I intend to get that done. So again, as we move on, there's going to be greater emphasis on the execution, right? Because again, there's these three phases, right? There's preparation, and you get to do that as long as you want. Then you go to preparation to execution, where you're not executing, right? Where we're playing with the time, because it's not execution, but you're preparing to execute. So you know, probably want to go out to the range and practice with the target before you go to live fire, you know. So this is, you know, that's what we're doing. And then in 2 to 3 weeks, we'll move into execution. And again, what I want to stress is the mere fact that we do that doesn't commit you to stop preparing, and nor does it commit you to take a test in advance of the time where you actually should take the test. So, you know, last week if my memory serves me, we did the exercise on assumptions. Is that correct?
Yes.
And really what I want to get to is again, with respect to logical reasoning, it's life. It's not just logical reasoning, it's life, right? But this is what they're doing. Now, I have no reason to believe whoever designs this test sits down and writes this, but I look at the product. Whether it's a flaw, whether it's an assumption, whether you're strengthening or weakening an argument, whether you're drawing the conclusion, it's right here. It's what they have to do to test whether you can do this. So, again, just step back, and if you do this in your personal life, you're going to do it in your professional life. It's going to spill over, right? You know, I was thinking about this on the way down. It's just a situation in my life I'm going to have to handle. Have you ever had people, is it just me, or have you ever had people in life you don't get along with?
Yes.
Anybody else? That's just because I just want, otherwise I may need to go see a shrink. Well, I probably need to see a shrink anyway. Right. But think about the human nature side of this, and think of the adjustment that is required, I think, to do this thing well, to do law well, or to do reasoning well. It seems to me there's an adjustment in human nature. Because human nature is when you don't get along with somebody. I don't know about your human nature, but mine is, you know, go fuck yourself, right? But that doesn't get you to solution, does it?
No.
And you take this little fabric, right, and you say you really do want to come to a conclusion that you think is important. Have you ever come to conclusions that you think are important in life?
Yeah.
Yeah, that you really don't want to screw up. And is it possible that the party you don't get along with has information relevant to the conclusion that you do not have?
Yes.
Then you get the conflict between the human nature, which is you may not want to reach out to this person, or you may not want anything to do with this person on the one side, and on the other side coming to a conclusion that is important to you. If you don't reach out, what you don't know will remain unknown. Right? So it's like, so even if you take it into politics and you just don't like somebody because they have a different political view, they voted for Trump, so you don't like him. Get over it. Or if they voted for Obama and you don't like him. But God's sakes, get over it, right? If you want to come to important conclusions, you really want to have access to these two categories. And it is, I really think, it is counter to much of human nature. So, just. So last week we covered assumptions, right? And now if we take this to the LSAT, everybody agrees that you're given the established facts.
Yes.
Right? That every sentence is indisputable. It is, right? An established fact, I mean, in my world, right, today is Sunday. I mean, you could argue life's an illusion, and therefore we really can't say today is Sunday because we may not exist. But insofar that we constrain ourselves to, we can only get to where reason takes us, to get that that's an established fact.
Yeah.
So it's not an inference, it's an established fact. I'm not inferring today is Sunday, today is Sunday, right? Or I don't exist, and if I don't exist, who are you listening to? Yeah. And then we discussed at some length the difference between the established fact, which you can rely on, which again is going to be challenged if not stipulated to in my world, right? But you get the difference between the established fact and the fact you infer from the established fact. Yes?
Yes.
Right? And that this is more problematic. I remember seeing the word problematic for the first time. I think I was close to 30, right? So, vocabulary really becomes part of life as you move. I looked at the word problematic, and I kind of thought it had something to do with a problem. I went to Lehman College, we didn't have, but not that the education wasn't rigorous, but I didn't participate in it. So what I'm saying is you can get past this. But you get that every inference is more problematic than every fact that's actually established. Meaning there's greater room for error here, right?
Yes.
Right? And going to my Vicky and the cell phone thing, right? Yes, it's a fact that there's a number. Yes, there's a fact that there's a name. Yes, there's a fact that there's a ring. When I say hi Vicky, that's not an established fact. Do you get it?
Yeah.
Does anybody need Aristotle for this? Right? But we're in the business of drawing valid conclusions, which are all the way down here, right? So we become aware of this is done with your head, not with your heart. And when it's done with your heart, can we please check with your head? And again, this is a skill, right? So, Edward's going to say the Mets are going to win the World Series this year. That's what he's going to infer. And he may be right, but he's been wrong all but 2 times. So, okay. But inferences are the pathway to conclusions. Inferences are not, your final inference is your conclusion. That's your final inference, right? But while you're inferring, you haven't reached the conclusion. Okay? Again, the inference is what you're claiming to be a fact. You're claiming the inference to be a fact based on facts you previously established in that it flows from that fact. Everybody agrees you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
And it's huge. Because if somebody out there knows what you don't know, and it's contrary to your conclusion, you're toast. Right? And again, I really think it conflicts with human nature. I mean, I remember as a kid, I grew up on 168th Street in the Bronx. Yankee Stadium's 7 blocks away, and my dad drove the Ogden Avenue bus, the terminus point, which was Yankee Stadium. So as a kid, I grew up hopping on the bus for free, going down to Yankee Stadium and trying to get in for free outside, which is what we did, and almost always successful. How do you not turn out to be a Yankee fan? Because they just think, okay, right? So again, counterintuitive human nature. Every time the Yankees won a baseball game, I wanted to read the New York Post or the Daily News the next day because they won, right? But anytime they lost, which almost always lost when I was a kid. But when they lost, again, I didn't want to read the New York Times. I didn't want to read the New York Post, and I didn't want to read the Daily News because bad news. Yes?
Yeah.
I think that's human nature, right? So you want to close your eyes to this stuff if it's contrary to what you want it to be. Well, you can't do that in this profession. Well, you can, but you're not gonna be good at it. So where's Aristotle? It's just like being aware we're all fucked up, right? And you're still gonna be fucked up when you're a lawyer. But you're going to go more up here than down there. Right? Say, okay, I really need to contract this category. So if I need to get from someone who I really don't respect, or somebody I really don't like, or somebody I just have conflicts with, maybe I respect the person, maybe I don't like the person, but still get along, right? I gotta go get it.
What if you can't?
Well, then it remains unknown, Russ. Yeah, I mean, we're never gonna be perfect in this process. How do I know that there's a witness who has relevant testimony, who is not identified by any other witness, who's not identified by any police officer? I don't know what I don't know, so I don't know that witness is out there. I may never know. That's why everything is beyond a reasonable doubt, and not beyond all doubt. But don't you get the probing, inquiring mind can really limit this? You get that? And that's why we have legal standards of, whether it's a preponderance of the evidence in the civil law or beyond reasonable doubt. I have never proved anything beyond all doubt. I never will prove anything beyond all doubt. But if I'm going to prove anything at all, it's always this way, right? Okay. And then you can't ignore that there's another side in law, and they have developed facts in opposition, which again, human nature says, fuck you. Because you're taking a contrary position. So the downside says, no, right? That's not what runs the show here. You can feel it, but you can't act on it, right? You gotta act on what's up here. When you complete this process, then I go try case. Understanding all this. And I'm just saying, not that it matters, right? But if you actually did this in your personal life, I really think you'd have a happier personal life. But you notice the way I say, I think, right? Because that's my mantra, right? Would it be fair to say other people say I feel? Mm-hmm. Right? And there's no right or wrong, right? Some people feel. The first thing is to feel, right? And some people, their first thing is to think. So mine clearly is to think, because I have no feelings. So just to connect this to the LSAT, when we spoke about assumptions last week, you take their definition of the issue, right? Which is an assumption is unstated and it's critical, right? Not helpful, it's not harmful, it's critical, right? So if I'm constructing an argument and I want to place the assumptions in this category, then I'm probably going to do something like give you two facts, but you have to connect those two facts because the common term that would connect them is not there. Meaning, again, if you write an indictment, the defendant John Doe, the defendant John Doe, the defendant John Doe, and then you make your allegations, right? So there are no assumptions because every count is the defendant John Doe. But if you were to be writing, maybe I'm writing to somebody else in an office, and I say, I start off here with the defendant was alleged to have committed the crime of robbery, and then my second sentence is Joe Smith ripped the locket from the defendant's, from the victim's neck while displaying a knife. Would it be fair to say that I've assumed Joe Smith is the defendant?
Yeah.
You see? Yeah, and you want to walk that up to the principal, right? All I did is you always have an assumption when a common term changes, right? And that's why lawyers have definitions, because when you have definitions, you have definitions. But in regular life, you don't read a novel and the first section of a novel are your definitions. You don't have the definitions, right? So then you're stuck with assumptions. And the assumption is anything that follows the original term meant to be the original term is assumed to be the original term. You with me? If I start out with the defendant, really, every other reference to that person should be the what?
Defendant.
The defendant. And anytime I don't use that term, for this to be valid, haven't I assumed that whatever the substitute term is the equivalent to the defendant?
Yes.
So where's Aristotle? So if I'm going to put an assumption in here, that's what I'm going to do. But I don't have to put an assumption in here. I can put an assumption in the inference, right? So if I use, so as you're reading this is now how, when I say reading textually, this is what reading textually is. So how do I put an assumption under an inference? Well, maybe my conclusion is going to be that it's Vicky on the phone. Maybe that's going to be my conclusion, right? And I want to see if you understand what an assumption is, right? So over here I give you facts. The name appears, the phone rings, the phone number appears. You have my testimony that the phone number appeared matches the phone number of Vicky Gormley from my experience. Well established facts, right? My conclusion is it's going to be Vicky, right? That's my conclusion. My inference to get to that conclusion that it's going to be Vicky, my inference is the voice I will hear on this phone is going to be Vicky's voice. You get it?
Yeah,
Because that's not my conclusion. My conclusion is it's going to be Vicky, yes?
right.
So the inference, you're still on the journey, right? The conclusion's the destination. And here I'm saying my ultimate conclusion is this will be Vicky. Haven't I inferred I will hear Vicky's voice?
Yeah,
And if I don't hear Vicky's voice, is it fair to say it's not Vicky?
yeah.
And therefore that inference is an assumption, meaning it has to be true for the conclusion to be valid. Do you see it? Talk to me.
Yeah.
It's not helpful, it's not harmful, it's essential. Because if that voice turns out to be Colleen, my daughter, is it fair to say my conclusion that it was going to be Vicky has been defeated?
Yeah.
So that's where you're going. Again, this is all going to come back to you in law school. So assumptions can be here, assumptions can be here, assumptions are richly here, right? Because again, you want to be lawyers, right? Which means you don't have to. It's going to be helpful if you become aware of your own human nature, right? And say, no. You know, this is not a business for ostriches, right? We don't put our head in the sand. We may want to put our head in the sand, and I certainly do. But that's not what you're going to do, right? So here, if I haven't told you something, you don't know it. But again, if my conclusion is going to be Vicky on the phone, would it be fair to say you've assumed that Vicky's alive?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what if Vicky's not alive?
That's the fact unknown.
Well, yeah, it's going to be. I'm kind of going to be bummed. But do you see it? Nobody said anything. It comes in from out of the. She's dead, right? You say, son of a bitch. Well, if she's dead, whose conclusion is wrong? Right? Mine, because my conclusion was it was going to be Vicky on the phone. So when you break this down in terms of where I can, and this works for every issue in logical reasoning. Okay, so do you guys get it can be here?
Yes.
All right, so now you're trying to solve an assumption issue. You see an answer choice that, like you're saying, what's with that?
Right.
Right? But then you say, well, whoa, wait a minute. If that happened, that conclusion couldn't have happened. Well, yeah. Well, facts and oppositions with respect to assumptions are alternative conclusions. In other words, if I were going to go into trials, it's fair to say I'm going to make an allegation that somebody committed a crime, and somebody at another table is going to say, Well, what we mean by that is you haven't committed the crime legally unless it can be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not really whether you committed the crime or not, right? It's can you prove beyond a reasonable doubt you committed the crime, right? So do you get, if the other side is right, I'm wrong?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that whoever's contradicting me is wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, every conclusion you've reached, just you don't have to take this into court, right? I remember the one time, needless to say, that's why I remember it, right? I remember the one time I came in as a kid, probably at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and I hadn't been drinking. I remember that one time. And I remember my mother accusing me of drinking, and I could not have been more indignant. Because she picked the one time I wasn't drinking. So, when, you know what I'm saying, when you defeat the other side's conclusion, right, then you've identified an assumption. My mother's assumption to reach the conclusion at that time that Peter was drinking, the assumption is he wasn't drinking. Do you see? It's just no big deal, right? But it is a big deal, because this is what you're going to use in your practice to solve, hopefully, really meaningful things to people in life. And you can do that. So you get that was the assumption thing, right? And what I want to do today is, again, I'll give an introduction on the flaws, and then we're going to do a similar floor, an abbreviated but similar floor exercise this week to the assumption that we did last week. And then again, I want to get in maybe half of an analytical section, half of a reading comp section, but I want to build on this. And then next week, there'll be yet another transition. Is that okay? So anything on assumptions? Is there any cleanup on assumptions at all? In other words, are there any questions you have from assumption issues that you want to go over?
One question, I don't have my big book today, but
You don't have,
the volume 6.
that's a problem. I mean, it's not death or anything. We'll need you to look on, because I don't have any.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you can, okay.
I had a question that I was working on during the week, an assumption question.
Okay.
Can you go over it?
Well, I can try. Where are we?
So the volume 5,
Okay,
and it's prep test 67,
okay.
and it's section 2,
All right, I don't have that with me, but that's fine. Listen.
question 14.
All right.
And
Now I'm going to ask you to
to
read it to me textually,
okay.
and then see if we can identify it here.
What page is it?
What page? 67.
Page 204.
Oh, 204.
Okay.
Okay.
Number?
Number 14.
And the issue is,
The issue is the argument relies on assuming which one of the following.
okay, so it's a necessary assumption.
Right.
Okay, I know what I'm looking for. What's my first sentence?
So there's a drama critic who's speaking.
No, just read it.
Okay.
Please.
There were many interesting plays written last year.
Okay, is there a period there?
Period.
Yes.
So there we have an established fact, right, that there were
Many interesting plays.
many interesting plays. Was it written last year?
Last year.
Last year.
But it was written, yes.
Written last year.
And if you do this at home, you'd be, again, it just takes a while, right? But this is the briefing, in order, because I'm not looking at it, right? But if you do this and you go from something that's unclear, generally this will get you to clear. Okay, so I have the first fact, which is there are many interesting plays last year. Next.
Surely, some will gain widespread popularity for at least a few years.
Okay, so surely some, so we went many and some, that's okay. Surely some will gain widespread popularity.
For at least a few years.
Okay. And so we have, now, Russ, we have two established facts, right? The first being, many interesting plays were written last year, and surely some of those, so not all of them, right? But surely some of those will,
Gain widespread popularity for us.
oh, why, this one, so that to me would be, the term would be widespread popularity term. Okay, so surely some of those will gain widespread popularity. Okay, next.
And some will even receive high critical acclaim.
And some will even receive high critical acclaim. Okay. So these could be the same, these could be different. I don't know, right? In other words, this tells me that some will gain wide popularity and some will gain wide critical acclaim, but I don't know whether those two things overlap or not.
But
Okay.
none will be popular several centuries from now.
Okay. Okay, so now I have to be told why that is. So, okay. So we have this, there's some gonna be around, they're gonna be, this is wide, what is it, wide popularity, is that what that is?
Widespread.
Widespread popularity, high critical acclaim, but none of those guys are gonna be around several centuries from now. None will be popular, so, okay, next.
The only plays that continue to be performed regularly over many decades and centuries are those that skillfully explore human nature.
Okay. So these don't explore human nature. All right, so I take that last one, right? The only, so if we write that as, again, I couldn't encourage you to do this enough. Imagine, right? You plan to take the test in, well, no, that's the last thing I was going to say. Imagine you plan to take the test in April, May, or June. And imagine this really does have to do with the way you have to think in law school. And therefore, there's an opportunity to think the way you're going to have to think before you get in here. Then you would have time. Then you can stay in preparation mode for months. I mean, I was down at some event at Baruch on Friday. And the students had just been at some kind of New York City bar event with a bunch of LSAT prep companies. And several of them asked me, is it true that that's studying, God forbid they say preparing, that studying for more than 3 months is unnecessary? And I said, I don't know where to go with this. They had been told, and again, what the motivations are, I can infer the motivations, right? And I do infer the motivations, right? But they went down to this event and were told by more than one prep company, right? That if you spent more than 3 months studying for the LSAT, you were wasting your time. Would it be fair to say you understand my message could not be more contrary to that?
Yes.
Yes.
It's like nuts. Now, I will infer, because I'm me, that is because they have a 3-month program and they don't want to be dealing with people who want to come back.
Yes.
But that's the Bronx in me. And I don't know, I can show that beyond the reasonable doubt, but I don't need to. All right, I'm sorry, Ross. I digress, as always. What's this final sentence again?
And none of the plays written last year examined human nature in a particularly skillful way. Oh, you want me to reread
No,
it?
yeah, because that's a really long sentence.
It's a
Yeah.
very long.
Yeah.
A lot of long sense.
So give me clause by clause.
Okay, the only plays that continue to be performed.
Does it say so?
No.
Okay. It says the only plays The only plays that continue to perform?
To be performed regularly?
Don't even know how to spell performed. Okay.
Over many decades and centuries.
Okay.
Are those that skillfully explore human nature?
Yeah.
And none of the plays written last year examine human nature in a particularly skillful way.
Okay, and then none of these get it done.
Right.
Right. So, to me, the assumption is here, and it could have been, when they take this and they say, you need to explore, what's this SEH in? Skillfully explore human nature, right? But then that very last clause says they did not do that, is that correct?
Correct.
So I don't think that can be an assumption, right? Because you're saying they did not do that. So then you go back above that and you say, but what's not uncontradicted yet is that the only plays that continue to be performed regularly over many decades and centuries, and therefore these plays could not be performed over many decades and centuries. And that is assumed, and that must be valid for this. So I don't know what words they're going to use, but I would be looking for, there's nothing here that has been played regularly over many decades or centuries. So is there an answer choice that gets me there?
Yeah, the answer was A, which is no play will be popular several centuries from now unless it continues to be performed regularly during the intervening time.
Yes. Yeah, because I'm leaving out popular because this is the conclusion. None will be popular, right? So they're taking the conclusion, the word popular from the conclusion, right? And then tethering it to the reason it can't be popular is that none of these are going to be played regularly over a continuous period of time. That would be a significantly high level difficulty, I think.
I got it wrong because I know that the assumption we're looking for isn't stated, so it's not there. It hasn't happened yet, I guess.
Well, it's not explicitly stated.
Right, but I was looking for something that at least had some of the explanation, like in other words, the words to match. And when they said intervening time,
Well, and wouldn't you, yeah, no, and that's fair. But it seems to be you're looking for a more precise answer than the answer they're required to give you. So you would like it to be more precise, but they would like to increase the tail rate.
right,
Right. And so for me, breaking this down, I'm pretty sure if I'd been sitting there looking at it, I would have said, first of all, where is the conclusion? And the conclusion appears that none are going to be popular several centuries from now, right? Now that has to be addressed. And that is addressed, because in the answer choice is a reference to be popular, right? But then you say, well, why? Right? Why will none be popular several centuries from now? And then I would go down here. And that has to do with, in order for that to happen, you have to be performed regularly over many decades. And therefore, none of these can comply with that. And so it's hooking those two things together. Yes, if they had used the term performing regularly over many decades, what is the term they used in its place?
perform regularly during the intervening time.
Yeah. What is the intervening time? Well, the intervening time is, I don't know, but how about, the conclusion is several centuries from now, right? And the starting point is last year. So that would be the intervening period of time, I think.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
The time when it's running, yeah.
Yeah, but again, think of what, have I mentioned this stuff is actually hard? So it's like, I get it, but I would have, and I have a richer understanding of this now because you brought it up. And I have a richer understanding of this now because I had to write it on this board. And I have a richer understanding of this now because, in that I wrote it on the board, and I can see, now that I have the answer, the way they worded it, how they proceeded. And that's how you, I think that's how you get this.
Thanks, Peter.
You're welcome. I'm so
But
excited.
sometimes it seems as if the answer, well, the answer is found within the passage. Because I went and underlined, but none will be popular several
Yes.
centuries from now, as we read it.
Yes, Ed, yes.
And then,
What I'm saying is, I can never say always, because that's not the way it is, right?
Right.
But to solve assumption issues, the vast majority of time, the answer choice has to refer back to the language in the conclusion. And so for the person sitting there who's able to identify the role in the argument, right? Say, no, that's the conclusion. That person's at a distinct advantage. Because if I were doing this, right, I would be all over. Some of this language has to appear. So yes, yeah, I think that observation is correct. And the briefing is what helps understand the role of the argument. Because the briefing then to say not just what are the words, but what was the author's design? How was this argument constructed? So it's a very interesting test. All right, now that I've survived that bullet